Well, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
My name's Chuck. This is Taryn. Together we are Chuck and Taryn, and it's our joy to be leaders here. Massive welcome to our whole church this morning. So we are being joined by all of our sites, all the way from Mearns in the south, all the way up to Peterhead in the north, and everyone in between, and our online community. And so you're so welcome this morning. Let's start this morning with some scripture. If you've got a Bible with you, you might want to turn to Hebrews chapter 12. You'll have to be quick on the draw though, because I'm going to read it almost immediately. It's also going to come up on the screen. Hebrews chapter 12, reading from verse 1, says this: Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. We have had a number of different passages of scripture that have been precious to us over the years, but this is definitely right up there. And often at real kind of significant moments, inflection points in our shared life together, we've kind of stumbled across or encountered these verses. And there are a couple of things that these verses tell us. One of them is that the race that's marked out for us is of God's choosing. It's of his design, right? The race marked out for us. It's God's design. It's of his choice. It's his choosing. And the second thing is that the appropriate response to having a race marked out for you by God himself is a faith response, right? We fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. And that's what we're going to do as a church family in this moment. This is a significant moment. It's an inflection point in the life of our church. If you're visiting today, you've come on a really unusual Sunday. Normally we just open up the scriptures and then wrestle with their meaning together. But we are at an inflection point as a church, and we have some news to share. And it's really big news. And so I'll just share what it is, and then I'll share how we got there. And then we'll share what we're going to do next. But it's probably better just to rip the Band-Aid off and just share what the news is. And the news is that towards the end of this year, Taryn and I, are going to be laying down the leadership of this church. And that's the really big news. There are some more other bits of news that kind of follow on from there, but that's the main thing, or a big thing. And so that's it. The second thing is, the reason we're doing that is that we are about to take up some leadership roles as the leaders of Verso Vineyard in St Albans in Hertfordshire, which is just north of London. And so we're laying down the leadership here to take up the leadership of Verso Vineyard in St Albans. And obviously then there will have needed to be a very robust and thorough and rigorous discernment process to figure out what comes next for Catalyst Vineyard. And we're in a position today to be able to share with you who will be the new leaders of Catalyst after we've gone. Okay, so that's where we're going this morning. I don't know whether that's what you thought was going to happen this morning, but that's it.
So I think it's fair to say that we've never imagined leading another church but Catalyst. And we honestly thought we would be in Scotland till we dropped. We absolutely didn't go looking for this opportunity. I think it's fair to say that we feel like our lives have been hijacked by the Holy Spirit. And the only appropriate response to that, we feel, is obedience, that we need to obey what the Lord is asking us to do. And so let me just give you a little bit of background. So we're part of the core leadership team for the Vineyard movement. And so we became aware in December that Mark Helvagian, who leads Verso Vineyard, was sensing the Lord moving him on. And it's clearly a very significant church within the movement. Mark is an amazing leader. And when we heard that news, we were all like racking our brains going, oh my goodness, who on earth could do this? Fast forward a little bit to conversations that we had with Andrew and Rosie McNeil just before we went on annual leave at Christmas, and then John and Debbie Wright the early part of the new year, who basically jumped on Zooms and said to us, guys, we feel you need to pay attention to this moment and ask the Lord what he's doing, which we did. So just before Christmas, many of you will be aware that dear Charles Gordon, he died. And what many of you probably don't know is that 17 years ago, Charles was the one that changed the whole trajectory, basically, of Chuck and I's lives, where his voice was the one that said we should lead what was then City Church, that is now Catalyst. And when Charles died, obviously we were deeply saddened because we love him and miss him. But also there was a sense that, oh my goodness, there's something profound in this, because Charles died and was buried in the 20th year that we'd been in Scotland. And I said to Chuck, long before we knew anything about Verso, there's something prophetic about this. And so over Christmas, we did exactly that, and we prayed and we just asked the Lord, Lord, what are you saying? Are you saying anything to us? And one morning, the Lord woke me up early with 3 words, which was 20, wave, and cathedral. And 20 basically was the 20 years that we've been in Scotland. And I thought, oh, I wonder if 20 symbolizes anything in the Bible. And so when I looked it up, it symbolizes completeness, military readiness, the age of maturity. It took 20 years to build the tabernacle, and it's also used to mark the beginning and the end of things. Cathedral, because the Lord reminded me that St. Albans has a cathedral, but also there was a sense that the movement needed another cathedral. And then wave, which is where for the last probably since the summer, I've been saying to Chuck, I feel like we're in the grip of God again in a way that we first felt when we started leading this church, that the wave of God is crashing over us and the power of God, and he's fully in control, and all we have to do is hold on for dear life. And so early that morning, I took Florrie, our puppy, up the hill where we live, and I just said to the Lord, Lord, are you really giving us permission to leave Scotland? And I felt the Lord say to me, what is one of the things that you tell people about how you came to be in Scotland? And I said to him, well, we say we wanted a beautiful place to bring up our children. And the Lord said, and you have.
So by this point in our story, you know, it was like time was slowing down, and every day was like 1,000 years, and we were totally aware that God was shifting something very significant in our lives and in the life of this church. And on the very first Sunday back in the new year, now I'm not expecting anyone to remember this, but I preached at the very first Sunday back, and I preached on the church in Antioch. And I was saying how, you know, the church in Antioch was a sending church, and no one had to prize Paul and Barnabas out of their hands because they chose to send them, even though it was painful. And I remember saying, you know, years and years ago, 30 years ago, this church laid hands on and sent out Bob and Joanne to China, and they've been there for 30 years. And more recently, you know, Thomas and Mary Urquhart went to Inverness, and Jude and Archie went to Elgin, and so on. I remember thinking in that moment, oh my goodness, I think we might be next. And actually the Holy Spirit fell on both Taryn and I. Taryn was sat just over there. She started shaking and sobbing, and I was trying to hold it together. And actually, it's funny, I looked back at the video of that talk recently, and you get about 14 minutes in, and suddenly you can see everything is changing for me, and you wouldn't have been aware of it, but I knew that God was saying something specific to us. And in fact, I went on to kind of talk about it, and I said, there may well be people sat in one of our services today, and it's like you just know that this is part of your story yet to be written, and that you're supposed to go. And in that moment, I was kind of like trying to say, oh, there may be someone in the room or whatever, but I knew fine well that I wasn't preaching to anyone else so much as I was preaching to myself. And so we realized by this point, we need to probably move towards pushing this door. And the truth is that we never want to be the kind of leaders who play the God card and just say, hey, God's told us, so this is what's happening. You know, we knew that we all hear God best when we hear God in community. And so we did exactly what you would hope that we would have done. We spoke to our various leadership teams. And so we spoke to the church council, and we spoke to the pastoral team, the senior pastoral team, and we spoke to Jim Purdy, who's the chair of Trustees. And we said, guys, you need to help us, because we need to pray together, and we wonder whether this might be a thing, and we need to hear God together. And that was super helpful. Now, what was really funny was when we spoke to the senior pastoral team, I mean, it was really messy. Like, there was a lot of sobbing and tears, mostly from us, but, you know, it was like really messy. And everyone was crying in the room except for Scott Robertson. And Scott was kind of laughing. And to be honest, it was a bit awkward. And so we said, Scott, you're going to have to tell us what's going on for you. And he said, this all makes total sense now. He said, on Christmas night, I had a dream. And in that dream, you guys were leaving our church. And he said, it was so real, I knew it was true. And I knew it was from the Lord. And I woke up and I said to Sarah, I think Chuck and Taryn are going to leave our church. And she said, that's not the Lord. Just forget it. Anyway, a couple of days later, they went walking with some friends, Chris and Libby. And Libby said to Scott, I've had a dream. And in the dream, Chuck and Taryn were leaving our church, and I don't know what to do with it. And Scott said, I've had exactly the same dream, and I don't know what to do with it either. When we spoke to the church council, a similar thing happened. Again, lots of emotion in the room. We've journeyed with those guys for so long. But Emma Waldridge was smiling. And it was like, this is a bit awkward. And so we said to Emma, you're going to have to explain what's going on for you. And she said, well, I've been waiting for this moment for over a year. And she said, I've had this song going round in my mind every time I think and pray about the church. They're changing the guard at Buckingham Palace. And so she's like, I knew there's some change happening here, and it's probably to do with the leadership of this church. And so she wasn't in any way surprised.
So by this point, the prophetic words were coming thick and fast, and it felt like most days we were getting something. We were in January, late January, we were in Nottingham, a gathering there, and an American lady came up to me. I'd never met her before. She was visiting, and she laid her hands on me, and she started praying for me, and she said, you're in labor, and you're having another baby, and it's baby number 2. And you're going to love baby number 2 as much as you love baby number 1. And then the very next morning, we woke up to a prophetic word from Kathleen Wilkie that said...
Let me just say, if you haven't had a word from Kathleen Wilkie, it's not true.
Yeah, because I kind of said, Lord, if it really is you, I need something from Kathleen, because she has sent things in over our whole journey. And this prophetic word came in from Kathleen, and she said, I had a dream last night that, Taryn, you had another baby. And so during the week of prayer and fasting, back in January, that we all went on together, we have many prophetic words coming in. I can't highlight them all, but one in particular came from a friend in Inverurie, and they said that they sensed the Lord, what 1 Kings chapter 19, where the Lord is passing by Elijah, they said that as they were reading it, they sensed the Lord very powerfully just highlight a particular phrase for them. And the phrase was, "Go back the way you came." And St. Albans is about 5 miles from where we lived 20 years ago, when we sensed the Lord called us to come to Aberdeen. And the truth is, we just don't have time this morning to be able to tell you all the amazing ways that the Lord has spoken to us about this moment. And we've received over 27 prophetic words and confirmations. And so we visited Verso in February. We were already, I think, pretty clear that we sensed it was the Lord. And we met with their senior team, who were amazing. We met with them as a group and then individually. The following day, we met their trustees, and we had an amazing time with them as well. And then the following day, we visited Verso for the very first time on a Sunday morning. And we came in dragging our suitcases and a little bit bedraggled. And the first person to greet us on the door said, "Oh, are you moving in?" Which again, we kind of took as a prophetic sign.
I'll tell you what, it's an amazing church. You know, they've got amazing resources, they've got an amazing staff team, they've got amazing leaders, they've got amazing buildings, and they're right on the edge of London in a really strategic location. And we just have a sense that God is going to do something over the forthcoming years, reaching right down into London and also right across that part of the country. And as much as we're heartbroken to be leaving this church, we are excited about what God's going to do in the next season of our lives and ministry.
And so within a few days, we had agreed to lay down the leadership of Catalyst Vineyard and move 500 miles back down south to St. Albans. And we really want you to understand that this is about obedience. This is about following the voice of the Lord. We absolutely know that the Lord has spoken, and we absolutely want to be the kind of people that say yes to the Lord. Whatever you want, we will do.
Yeah. And so obviously that leaves a gap in Catalyst. And so we wanted to design a process that was really robust and that took account of the full breadth of the leadership community in our church, all the different teams that contribute towards the leadership of this church. And so there were 4 stages in the discernment process for choosing our successors. And the first one was that we talked to our site pastors and to the associate pastors, and we said to them, "Hey, listen, we want you to fast and pray because we need to hear the Lord." And we said to them, "Please will you go away and consider this question, which is, for the sake of the people that you lead, who should be the next leaders of Catalyst Vineyard? And in particular, like, who would you willingly and gladly follow for the years ahead?" And so they all went away and they fasted and they prayed and they considered, and then they nominated and they sent in the reasons for their nominations. And the truth is, it was a landslide. You know, actually, there was one particular couple who received the overwhelming majority of nominations. And let me just say, by the way, I'm saying a couple, and it is a couple, but it could easily have been a single person. Right, so there's no reason why you have to be married to lead in this church. And if you're single, you know, every single position of leadership is available to you in this church. But it happened to be a couple. And so I'll tell you who that couple is in a minute, or Taryn will actually. The second stage was that the wider Vineyard family had the opportunity to interview this particular couple. And really, providentially, John and Debbie Wright, our national directors, and also Andrew and Rosie McNeil, the associate national directors, along with us, were in Aberdeen for a pastor's thing that we were doing. And so they had the opportunity to interview them and to ask them a whole bunch of questions and to spend several hours with them. And they enthusiastically endorsed them. And they commented on their humility and their compelling sense of call and their track record and their love for this church and also their understanding of what the role required. And they said at the end of it, in the report that they wrote, the conclusion of the meeting is that we as Vineyard Churches UK and Ireland would be delighted to license them as senior pastors of Catalyst Vineyard Church if the leadership, trustees and council of Catalyst were to appoint them. The next meeting was with the trustees. And I'm a trustee, but I recused myself from that meeting so that this particular couple were able to speak freely and to talk about the things that they might want to do differently or to change without thinking, oh, this is awkward, Chuck's in the room. And so they were able to do that, and they reported that they'd had a robust and wide-ranging conversation that had resulted in unanimous agreement that the Lord was calling this particular couple to lead Catalyst Vineyard for the next leg of the race. And then finally, the church council. And we met the church council with this couple, and we kind of interrogated them, and we prayed together, and we asked them a whole bunch of questions. And again, by this stage, it was absolutely clear that the Lord was speaking so unanimously and so clearly to us all. And so it was totally obvious. It was as obvious as the nose on your face.
And so I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share with you today that the new lead pastors of Catalyst Vineyard are Scott and Sarah Robertson. Chuck and I love them. They carry the same heart, the same DNA. They are the same tissue match.
Yeah, and we're super conscious that we know these people very well, and some people in this room or in the other rooms know them extremely well, but others of you will be like, well, I'm not sure I even know who they are. And so let me just kind of say a little bit about them. Sarah used to be a secondary school teacher. She was a guidance teacher and an English teacher. And then she joined the team here, and she was the director of training here. She started the leadership college here. And she did such an amazing job, in fact, that then she was invited to roll out that leadership college across the whole Vineyard movement across the UK and Ireland. And she's done a phenomenal job at that. She's been the director of training for the Vineyard for several years. And she's been responsible for all of the different training programs that are delivered in that space. And Scott, well, we rescued Scott from a career in sales. There's nothing wrong with a career in sales, but we rescued him from that, and he's been a pastor on our team for many years, doing a phenomenal job leading the Aberdeen North site with Sarah. And more recently, in the last 6 years, he's been overseeing all the other site pastors and resourcing and supporting and encouraging them really, really well. And for the last 12 years, like I say, those guys have been leading the Aberdeen North site so brilliantly.
And we've watched them grow into the incredible leaders that they are today. And we absolutely believe that God has called them.
That's right. You need to know, guys, these are wise and godly and kind and compassionate leaders. They're people of the highest integrity. They're both brilliant communicators. They love God's word. They love his spirit, and they love this church.
And we are just so excited that we are able to leave Catalyst in such amazing, wonderful, capable, strong hands. It's a delight. It's an absolute delight for us. Okay, so just a couple of other things to note. It's important to recognise that a similar process has been taking place for the leadership of the Scottish region of the movement, of the Vineyard. And we're really thrilled to be able to tell you that Thomas and Mary Urquhart, who were here many moons ago as firstly youth pastors, and then they pioneered the Ellen site, and they started that, and they were site pastors in Ellen until 7 years ago. They handed over that leadership to go and plant Inverness Vineyard. And they are the most brilliant, amazing, remarkable leaders, and they are going to be overseeing the Scottish region of the movement, and we're absolutely delighted about that. Also, in case it's helpful for you to know, Chuck and I, we're going to continue our national role, serving John and Debbie Wright as Associate National Directors, part-time, exactly as we have been now, all the way through.
Okay. So in a moment, you're going to hear from a bunch of representatives from the different teams that we've talked about. But first of all, just let's talk about a quick timeline. So when is this happening? Well, it's not happening right now. It's happening in October. And so in October, we have our Scottish Vineyard gathering, as we always do, and that is going to be our last working weekend.
Oh, don't see emotion.
And so during the weekend there, we're going to lay hands on Thomas and Mary and commission them as the new regional leaders for Scotland. And then on the Sunday, we're going to have a big gathering, just as we are in a couple of weeks' time, at King's in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, and we're going to lay hands on Scott and Sarah and commission them as the new lead pastors of Catalyst Vineyard. In the meantime, well, let me just say, after that, we'll take a sabbatical, and we'll have a few months to just kind of regroup after that weekend, and then we're going to start as the leaders of Verso Vineyard in January. And in the meantime, we're thrilled that John and Ellie Mumford are coming. Ellie's going to speak at our big gathering in 2 weeks' time, and we're going to have a really great time together as a whole church. I encourage you to just come along, bring your friends, and Ellie's going to bring a word in season for us as a church, which we think is going to be really, really significant. So please make every effort to come. Okay, so now we're going to hear from our trustees, and then the church council and the pastoral team, and then John and Debbie, and then we're going to meet Scott and Sarah. So over to you, Jim.
Good morning, Catalyst Vineyard Church. I'm the chair of the trustees. It's been my privilege to serve as a trustee for over 17 years, and along with the other trustees, past and present, it's been our honour also to serve Chuck and Tarn as they worked out their vision and strategy for this church. The role of the trustees, it's mostly hidden. Two of our key responsibilities are the good stewardship of the financial resources and also to ensure that charity law is adhered to in everything we do. We carry the responsibility for the employment of the staff, including the senior leaders. And in that context, we've been invested in the process preparing for the transition that Chuck and Tarn just described to you. And I want to confirm that as trustees, what Chuck and Tarn said a moment ago, that we think the process has been robust and done with integrity, and we feel we're on the right track with regard to the outcome. I want to take a few moments to say in public how much we honour and respect Chuck and Tarn for everything they've done. Chuck didn't mention that the trustees meeting was particularly emotional, but I have to tell you, we're going to miss them a lot when they move on. But we're absolutely confident that for them as a family and for Verso Church, that God is doing something new, but also for the Vineyard movement in the UK and their roles with VC UKI. So Scott and Sarah, the trustees, as Chuck said, were unanimous in their support that these were the right people to carry on the future of Catalyst Vineyard Church. We all know how high quality they are. We've seen what they've done with Northside. Their relationship with Jesus Christ and their willingness to serve comes forward. I think the most important thing that I really want to say to all of the congregations this morning is that they are going to need all of our support as they transition and step into the new roles and develop into those roles. And as trustees, we're completely committed to doing that for them. And finally, we know, and research has shown, that the life cycle of any church, it's very important to have new, younger leaders come into place. And so we feel that God is in this process doing exactly what we need to ensure the long-term vitality and growth of Catalyst Vineyard Church into the future. So in finishing, I'd like to invite everyone over the coming weeks, as the trustees will be doing, to pray in support for Chuck and Tarn and what they're moving into, and Scott and Sarah and what they're moving into. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass over to Björtsna.
Hello everyone, I'm Jyotsna Nair, and I have the privilege of sharing on behalf of the Church Council in this very significant moment in our church. First, we want to honor Chuck and Taryn. Their leadership over the past 17 years has been nothing short of extraordinary. They have faithfully led this church with passion, wisdom, and deep love, not just for Catalyst, but for the wider Vineyard movement. Scotland looks remarkably different because of their leadership. First through their multi-site journey, then through an intentional season of church planting, and then as the regional leaders for the nation of Scotland. Their impact on this church, this city, and beyond is immeasurable. Their kingdom contribution is immense, and we are deeply grateful for their obedience to God's leading. As we look at the transition, we are confident that the Lord has spoken, and that assurance is like solid ground beneath our feet. But there is also sadness because we love Chuck and Taryn, and they will be deeply missed. At the same time, we couldn't be more confident about what's ahead. We fully affirm and endorse Scott and Sarah as they step into the role of lead pastors. During the discernment process, what came shining through was their love for Catalyst Vineyard, their heart for the kingdom, their leadership ability, and their unwavering commitment to Jesus, making them exactly the right people to lead us into the next season. They are faithful, they are experienced, and deeply rooted in this church and this region. As a team, we believe that God's plans for Catalyst Vineyard are bigger than any one person or season. This transition isn't about leadership, it's about stepping forward together in faith, trusting that God is leading us into something new and significant. With Scott and Sarah at the helm, we have confidence that this church will continue to be a place where people encounter Jesus, experience community, and see the kingdom of God break out in their lives. This is a time of transition, but it is also a continuation of God's faithfulness to our church. We know that He has gone before us, and we trust in His plans. So today we celebrate all that has been and will look forward with faith and expectation to all that is to come. So let us continue to pray, encourage, and champion both Scott and Sarah and Chuck and Taryn in this new chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyotsna. Wow. Well, there's never a dull moment, is there, at Catalyst Vineyard? Things are always changing, and my name's James, and I'm just going to speak a little bit on behalf of the associate pastor team and the wider pastoral team as well, and it's just a privilege to be able to share. Just to say, and Chuck mentioned it earlier, and we kicked off with scripture, but this is what it says in Colossians chapter 1, and I've been hanging on this scripture as well throughout this whole process. It says this about Jesus, that He's before all things, and in Him, He holds all things together. He's the head of the body, the church, so that in everything He may have supremacy. It's a good reminder that our Jesus is the head of the church, and in particular, this church. It belongs to Him. And He can send His people, His members, anywhere and at any time to fulfill His purposes. And I just feel this morning that we need to remind ourselves that change is part of the kingdom, and that God's hand and favor is upon our lives. And at the same time of all of this change, I don't know if you realize this, but last weekend, 1,000 people across all of our sites were together. That's extraordinary. That in the midst of change, God's hand is clearly doing something. Anyway, and so as a team, as we've listened to what God is saying and doing in Chuck and Taryn's lives, we felt definitely the weight of this moment. And yet also, we've always remembered that they themselves have taught we move when the cloud moves. When God's Spirit moves, we must move. And so what's unfolded in this discernment process has reflected what we deeply believe, that when the scriptures, the Holy Spirit, and the saints converge, God's will is revealed. And so as a team, we've been faithfully praying and weighing what God has been saying to Chuck and Taryn and to Scott and Sarah. Just want to say early last year, we had a strong indication that change was coming. Tammy, who's on the team, also received this extraordinary picture from the Lord of rearranging furniture. A word that we thought was about the shifts in staff and ministry, but we didn't fully really grasp how significant that insight was going to be. Along with the wider pastoral team that the guys have mentioned, we dedicated a full week of prayer and fasting and seeking God's direction for who would succeed Chuck and Taryn. And I just want to say, I think on behalf of the site pastors and the associates, we approach this moment with, I guess what Paul says in Romans, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. And we laid our lives down, and we surrendered, and we prayed. And so as we walk through this process, you've heard a few of the prophetic words and scriptures being shared from across the church, from people who didn't have a clue what was being said behind closed doors. It just became really clear that the Lord was definitely redeploying Chuck and Taryn and raising up Scott and Sarah for this next season. Just want to say, again, without overly repeating, we love Scott and Sarah, people of character and gifting and great experience, and we look forward to the future and serving together. And then obviously, Chuck and Taryn, we just want to say publicly, you guys have always led with extraordinary integrity, never asking others to do what they weren't willing to do themselves. And I think what that's happening here is going to have ripple effects, not just across our church, but actually across the movement of the Vineyard. And so, can I just wrap up quick? On behalf of Hazel, Tammy, myself, and the wider pastoral team, we want to express our deep gratitude to Chuck and Taryn for their leadership, their attentiveness to the Spirit, their risk-taking, and their many, many personal sacrifices that many of us will never fully know. And to be honest, we're going to work out the best way of honoring them. And so to close, what we want you to hear most is that this has been a kind, fair, prophetic, and mature discernment process. I've been a part of this church for over 30 years, 25 of it, I know you wouldn't believe it, I've been in leadership. And I just want to say this, it's rarely I've seen such a clear, Spirit-led confirmation. And ultimately, it's just confirmed again. This is what we've always believed, that God speaks through his Spirit, his people, and his word. And so as an associate pastor team, we wholeheartedly commend Scott and Sarah and affirm and believe what the Lord is saying over Chuck and Taryn's lives. And we step into this next season with confidence, knowing God is leading us all. Okay, bless you. I think we're going to hear from John and Debbie Wright.
Hi, Catalyst Vineyard. Hi, Catalyst Vineyard. We are John and Debbie Wright. Together we lead Vineyard churches here in the UK and Ireland, and we're grateful to be able to share this moment with you. As you process the news about Chuck and Taryn moving on and Scott and Sarah Robertson becoming your new senior pastors. Transitions like this bring mixed emotions, gratitude for the past, sadness at saying goodbye, and excitement for what is to come. What we found is that it is entirely normal for these emotions to coexist. One doesn't exclude another. Being thankful for everything that God has already done here, grieving the moving on of your beloved pastors Chuck and Taryn in the coming months, and celebrating with expectation as you enter the new season with Scott and Sarah are all healthy parts of processing a significant change like this.
Over the years, we've had the privilege of getting to know and work quite closely alongside Chuck and Taryn. We've admired their leadership, their heart for the church, and the way they faithfully serve Jesus. They are dear friends to us. We've also served with them on the Vineyard leadership team, more recently on the core of that team, where their contributions are invaluable. As you know, their passion for the expansion of the kingdom and their deep love for people runs through everything they do. They bring momentum and joy to everything they touch, and we are thrilled when they agreed to become associate national directors last year, and they will continue in this role in the next chapter of their life as well.
Through this succession process, we've spent significant time with Chuck and Taryn, listening, discerning, praying. We're also involved in a detailed and thoughtful interview process with Scott and Sarah, your new incoming pastors. And following the conclusion of this, we wholeheartedly endorse this transition of leadership. We can see God's hand all over it. And we want to commend Scott and Sarah to you. They are deeply faithful, wise leaders of high caliber who love Catalyst Vineyard and its people. We have no doubt they are the right leaders for this next season. We know Scott to be a wonderful leader, and we've worked with Sarah more closely over the last couple of years. We have nothing but admiration for her leadership ability as she has pioneered the Vineyard ministry pathway for the UK and Ireland, especially the college, and seen such healthy kingdom fruit around the movement.
But this isn't just about leadership change. It's about God's ongoing story in and through your church. So today we want to say we are with you, we are praying for you, and we are excited for what's ahead. This is a new chapter, but it's the same faithful God who is leading the way. May you know his presence, may you know his guidance and his blessing as you step forward together. Much love to you all.
Hi.
Fantastic. Well, would you please welcome Scott and Sarah? So good. Okay, so guys, we've talked a bit about our story, but the Lord spoke to you guys as well about us moving on. Just talk about that.
Yeah. So I think Chuck and Taryn mentioned the dream that I'd had at Christmas time, and that was huge for us in helping just firstly settle us that the Lord was speaking to you guys, that you're going like, I honestly can't describe how vivid it was. I woke up on Boxing Day morning feeling like I'd just walked out of a room with these guys where they told me, to the point where I was like, have I just walked out of a room where they've told me? And I told Sarah, and she was like, no, that's definitely not the Lord.
I'm really holy. It's really holy.
But I just knew something. And so then when we came to that moment when you guys were expressing like, oh, we think there may be something for us here, like we just felt really settled in that moment, because we knew that if the Lord was calling you to go and that he was speaking to us, that he would continue to have a plan for Catalyst too. And so we felt a real peace just knowing that.
Yeah, and Chuck and Taryn have mentioned the very emotional church council meeting where they shared their sense of call to go to Verso. And that night, I came home from that meeting, and what I really wanted to do was escape and watch Netflix, because it was all the feelings, but I knew I just needed to hear the Lord. And I just spent some time praying with Jesus, and he led me to the book of Philemon, which I think I've maybe read one other time in my life. But I was reading that book, and as I read that book, there was one verse that stood out to me, and it was verse 12, and it says this: I am sending him who is my very heart back to you. And where it says him, read them. And there were two things about that verse that really stood out to me. It was that my very heart. And it felt like a perfect description of this moment, really, because we, in case you haven't heard it through this morning, we really love Chuck and Taryn. We really value them. Our lives, most of my adult life has been in this church, being supported and encouraged and enriched by their leadership. And so it felt like that, you know, I'm sending my very heart. And then the second part of that verse is back to you. And I felt reminded of the fact that 20 years ago, Chuck and Taryn, in faithful obedience to Jesus, said yes to a call to come to Scotland and to be part of the church here. And now he was calling them back, because he's got another faith adventure for them in St. Albans and Verso Vineyard. And so really that verse just spoke to me. It was a confirmation of, yes, this is what the Lord is doing. And it also was really reassuring, because I was like, the church has literally been doing this kind of thing for centuries. So what a reassurance that actually God is just continuing to write his story in the life of our church family.
Wonderful. So you've heard some of our story about how the Lord has called us to lead Verso Vineyard. We'd love to hear how the Lord has been calling and speaking to you to lead Catalyst Vineyard.
Yeah, so early on in the process, a member of the team had said that they'd had a picture from the Lord that Chuck and Taryn were being called to go to another church and that Scott and I would succeed them as the lead pastors. And so really early on in this whole process, we were paying really close attention, not just to what the Lord was saying to you guys and to the church, but what he might be saying to us personally. And so we were really listening hard. And I went to a Vineyard leaders gathering at the end of January, and someone came up to me at that gathering. They had absolutely no awareness of this situation, of everything that was going on. And they came up to me and they said, "You're in a moment of transition, and the Lord wants you to know that he's in it. He's in it." And they said that they had a picture of a bell curve, and I was at the top of the bell curve, and that felt significant because for those of, nobody will know, but my maiden name was Bell, and so it just felt significant, that wee detail from the Lord. But we're at the top of a bell curve, and what they saw was another wave. Instead of it coming down, as a bell curve normally does, where it dips, there was another wave that came off from the top of the bell curve, and it went up. And what they said was, this change needs to happen for the next wave of God to come. And the Lord wants you to know that he's with you and that he's never going to leave you. And that was really significant for me, because I've basically always said to Jesus, I'll do whatever he asks me to do, as long as you do it with me, as long as you do it with me. And so that was just so lovely of the Lord to just give someone who has no idea that word for us. And then at the same gathering, someone else came up to me and they said, "I see you growing in wisdom and stature with man and with God as Jesus did. And the Lord's increasing your authority and he's increasing your leadership." And so that, again, just felt like the Lord was really speaking about this change that was to come and this change that was ahead. And there was a real affirmation of the secret place in that word as well, and that just felt like such a sweet reminder from the Lord of everything that I've been learning and journeying with him over the last couple of years. As well as that, honestly, for the last 6 months, I've just had this, growing sense of unsettledness where I've been like, something's changing. What's the change? And I kept asking the Lord, I was like, what do you want me to lay down? What do you want me to hand over? I don't know. And he was like, I don't want you to hand over anything. And I'm like, okay, but I still feel really unsettled. And it was just, I realize now that was just a prophetic sense of really this moment that we're in now, is that this change that was ahead.
Yeah, and we reached out to some friends and family who are not attached to the situation in any way, shape or form, and did the classic, I don't know if you've ever done a covert, we're trying to process something but we can't tell you what it is, but will you just be praying for us moment? And again, a bunch of the words that came back from our friends and family were about change. It was about increasing authority and influence, and particularly one word where they were standing on the edge of a cliff under the sea, and the invitation from the Lord was to jump into the depths and to trust him with it. And so again, all of those things just felt like they were clicking the volume up on what we already sensed that the Lord was already saying to us. And I love that the Lord speaks to us as we are. Often the Lord speaks to Sarah artistically and creatively and sentimentally. He was much more blunt with me. I came to the back at North for prayer one week while we were discerning this, and somebody on our team at North literally came to the back to me, prayed for me for a couple of minutes, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "And I know that you're not going to be doing this forever, and we know that you guys are going to be doing what Chuck and Taryn do." And just, that was it. And so I didn't know what to do. I was like, thank you. I didn't know how to respond, because we were literally asking that very question in that moment. And so it just, again, felt like the Lord was just confirming again. And a couple other things for me as well. There was someone in our site who came and grabbed me after the service one week and said, I sense that there's a season of change coming for you. And the invitation from the Lord is to lead as you were made to lead. You don't have to copy anyone else. And for us, that felt really significant, because obviously Chuck and Taryn are phenomenal leaders, and they've led us so wonderfully over the last 17 years. And so, as part of my praying and processing this, I was like, how do you follow Chuck and Taryn? How do you do that? And it just felt like the Lord was just really kind in that moment to say, just be who we've made you to be, be who I've made you to be. And then again, at our leadership essentials, one of the guys was praying for me at the end. And he just said, out of nowhere again, none of these people knew anything about the situation, just said, this is an Elijah and Elisha moment for you, and the Lord is passing the mantle. And the mantle means that you'll be able to grow even more leaders than you've been doing previously to this point. And just, so those three things for me just really confirmed it. And so having been nominated by the site pastors, that felt like God was speaking in community what he'd already been speaking to us personally. And so when we were asked to become the next lead pastors, we said yes.
And we are so grateful that you did. So what does stepping into the role of lead pastors look like for you and for Catalyst?
Yeah. So in one sense, this is huge news, right? It's massive. And for some of you guys, you'll have journeyed the last 17 years with the same lead pastors, and it's a huge moment. But in some other ways, there'll be very little change. For each of us, our site pastors will still remain our site pastors. We'll still love them and follow them into all the adventures that Lord is leading us into. Our church family is still the exact same church family. You're still going to love hanging out together on a Sunday and serving together and opening the Word together and worshiping together and pursuing Jesus in your communities together. And the mission is still the same. Like whether you're here in the room today or in one of the sites, your mission to reach the town or the community that you're in is exactly the same. We're still running after Jesus with all that we have. Lots of things will remain exactly the same. At the same time as that, we do have the beginnings of some ideas that we think will shape this next season for us. And one of our first thoughts is this, that as lead pastors, it would be really helpful for us to have a base. Chuck and Taryn have been helping us think about how we could have a base, how we could shape things for the future in light of what they've learned. And one of the key things that they've reflected to us is actually at times going around the sites and not having a base has been a wee bit isolating for them. And some clarity really came in the last season when, I don't know if you remember, when Dave and Lizzie McGregor came from Grace Church in New Zealand, and they spoke at the Scottish Leaders Gathering last year, and we had the chance to sit down and grill them on a Monday evening. We were like, how do you do it? And they said, we've got a base that we return to in amongst visiting our sites. And so having heard their story and having heard the advice that Chuck and Taryn have given us, we are going to have a base. And we actually think that the North site can continue to be that base for us. Lots of people know us there. Lots of people know our children there. There's a real sense that there will be support and long-term relationships there that will sort of carry us through the highs and the lows that lead pastoring will bring us, I'm sure. And we really believe that there's a way of doing this where we can have a base at North, but also be fully present and available to each of our sites as well in a way that's really helpful and meaningful. And we're also really aware as well for our kids that they're at a really pivotal moment in their faith journey. And we know that what they have at North with the team, the relationships, the friendships that they have there is really formational for them and how their journey with Jesus and learning how to walk with him. And so we really want to make sure that we have consistency for them and amongst it all too. And so we're going to do that.
Yeah, and so in regards to our role as the site pastors of North, initially we're going to remain as the site pastors of North, and so we're figuring out like the rhythm at the moment of how often we'll be there in the base and how often we'll be around in and around the life of the sites. So looking forward to coming and visiting you all. Sorry, I just had to say that. And what we're going to do is we're looking at putting some additional staffing into North in order to support what's happening there and also to release us to be able to be present to all of the sites as the lead pastors at Catalyst. Chuck and Taryn have said that I'm the director of training with Vineyard Churches, which is an absolute joy and privilege to serve in that role. But I hold two roles with the Vineyard. So I am the director of training. I lead the training team, but I'm also the campus head for the Scotland campus for the Leadership College. Big shout out to the college. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 days. I'm going to continue to serve as the director of training, leading the team. But then we're going to hand over my campus head role. And someone else is going to have the joy and the privilege and the delight of seeing what Jesus does in the college space every Thursday with the Scotland campus. And so that role is going to be advertised in the summer. And then the hope will be that the new campus head will start in September with the new college cohort. And so I'm just really excited for someone else to get that opportunity to do that. So, yeah.
Really good. And then finally then, just as you're starting to look ahead, what are you sensing or what are you seeing the Lord doing in the future?
Yeah, so it's a new season ahead for sure. And I just want to commend you guys for modeling to us so beautifully what it is to follow Jesus. You have been so open-handed with everything that the Lord's been able to just pick you up and move you 500 miles away. And so thank you for just modeling what faithfulness and obedience looks like to us. And so while there's sadness for this leg of the race, like coming to a close, we have a sense of expectation for what the Lord is going to do in the next season. Like, the reality is, God has, you know, we are the lead pastors because Jesus is the senior pastor. And Jesus has led us through so many amazing seasons in the last, 17 years in the life of this church. Unbelievably, the whole church family used to fit in this one building. But now there are 7 sites. You're in one of them this morning, who are happening and living and loving in their community because Jesus led us on that adventure. We've already mentioned the new churches that have been started in Scotland, and we know that there's so much more ahead. And so we're just so confident that the Lord is going to lead us into a whole new season. And I just think Jesus writes the absolute best stories. And I'm just so excited to see the story that he's going to write in the life of Catalyst Vineyard in this next leg of the race.
And honestly, we feel incredibly honoured and humbled to be taking on this role. We recognise the responsibility that comes with it, and so we feel incredibly honoured to be taking it on. We look around our church and we can see site pastors and ministry heads and a staff team and hundreds of you guys who serve your socks off and love your communities every single Sunday, and all the points during the weeks at Mainly Musics and Alphas and every other thing. And honestly, we feel so excited about what this next season looks like. We can see that there's amazing family running after Jesus with all that we have to see God's kingdom come in the northeast of Scotland, and nothing's going to change in that journey. That's exactly what we're going to keep doing. We also recognise that 4 of our sites now have buildings, but 3 of our sites don't, and we're committed to seeing every site have a base for the place, and so we're going to continue pursuing that with the best of our ability to make that happen. And we recognise as well that there's future churches that live in the hearts of some of you here today or some of you in one of our sites. And again, we're committed to being a church planting church for the sake of this nation, because we know that we're in a moment with the Lord. Like when you see young people are coming to faith at a higher degree of knots than any other time I've ever been aware, we know that there's going to have to be brilliant churches in every part of this nation. And so we're committed to playing our part as well. For each of you who have a dream of a church in your heart, we want to see that come to fruition. And ultimately, what we're going to do, church, is we're going to keep listening for the voice of Jesus, and we're going to keep running after him exactly where he tells us to go and doing exactly what he tells us to do.
Really, really good. Really good. So let me just make a couple of closing remarks. First of all, some people love change. And if that's you, then it actually doesn't really matter what the change is. It's just like, yeah, this is brilliant. Change is coming. For others of us, change is really hard. And so there'll be people in our services this morning who are finding this news difficult just because of the change. And so can I just ask that we just tread gently for the next few days and just be kind to each other? And just scoop up wherever we can people who are struggling. That's the first thing. The other thing to say is, just to let you know, there obviously are people who are part of our church who are not able to be here today. Fear not. An email is going out at lunchtime today, which explains everything that's happening. And also, it's all available on YouTube. And so, there may be people here who are like, goodness, there was so much information in that. I'd love to just hear that all again. Well, good news, you can. Either on the podcast or the YouTube channel, you'll be able to do that. And also, it may well be that you have a whole bunch of questions about what you've heard. And again, the good news is if you head to our website, there is a page that's going live today, which will have a whole bunch of questions and also some answers that will help you as you try and process all this stuff. And the final thing to say is, obviously, even as this news is being shared with our church family, there's also very similar news being shared with Verso Vineyard in St. Albans. And so we would be super grateful if you would pray for that church too, as they process the news that they're losing their senior pastor and gaining new ones. And so we'd really, really appreciate that.
Okay, we are going to say goodbye to the live stream. Goodbye, live stream.